people to roll in, or should we get started?
We'll go ahead and get started, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll just give a brief welcome and quick overview. Want to say welcome to you all. Excited to have you with us today as we kick off ECU's 6th Annual Civility Summit, albeit in a different format, but hopefully just as engaging and interesting when it comes to our topic. I'm Dennis McCunney. I serve as, my pronouns are he, him, his. I serve as the Director of Intercultural Affairs here at East Carolina. I also teach part-time in our poli-sci department. So to get us started, just let me give you share a brief overview of the Civility Summit and some of our goals with the program. So this summit historically provides opportunities for students, faculty, and staff, and members of our community from the state and region to engage in conversations about civility and how that intersects with topics such as activism, race, politics, sexual orientation, gender identity, and global affairs. So our overarching goal of the event is for these conversations to fuel participants' desires to make changes in themselves, which can aid their work in becoming positive change agents. Our goals and learning outcomes include promoting democratic values within our campus community, encouraging unity in the face of public divisiveness, honoring active citizenship as a daily practice and aspirational goal, encouraging students to creatively engage in constructive conflict, and promoting, as Dr. King said, steady, loving confrontation to promote a more just and equitable world. So historically, we've designed this summit as a half-day conference to discuss some of these issues and work towards these goals. This year, we decided to solicit input from some of our global partners to engage with the topic of building peace after conflict. And I think maybe perhaps a more apt title would be building peace within and among conflict as opposed to after, as conflict seems ever present these days in our current social and political realities. So for all of us in the US, as you know, it's been a difficult and exhausting year. After a particularly divisive and tragic summer of violence and racial injustice, as well as a charged election season culminating in extremist acts of violence at the US Capitol, on top of serious public health issues brought on by the pandemic. In many ways, many of us feel as if our social fabric is torn and tattered. Questions like how do we heal? How do we move forward? How do we rely on our deeply held democratic principles? All these questions are things that we're addressing, not only as a campus community here at ECU, but in our city, in our region, and across our country. So as you'll see from the website, the ECU United website or Civility Summit website, through the help of our Fair Trade Learning partner, Amizade, based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, we plan to offer through this summit series 4 90-minute sessions over 4 weeks addressing this topic with guest speakers from around the globe and looking at it from a variety of different perspectives. Our partners' experiences and perspectives within their own local contexts will shed some important light on this topic. And so we encourage you to mark your calendars for all 4 of these sessions to participate in the series in its entirety. And we're excited to hear from our friends today from Belfast. I want to thank, just a note of thanks to say, kudos to our Intercultural Affairs team, particularly Katie Locke, Sean Simon, and Tara Kermit for help in putting this event together. And we're looking forward to kicking this off today. So that's our kind of brief introduction. Excited to share with you and pass the baton to Brandon from Amizade, who will keep us moving.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you to ECU for holding and creating such an important forum. Really hope that we can help collaborate in bringing about a little bit of justice to some of these very important topics here in the next month. So what's going on here? as Dennis just said, ECU is hosting its 6th Annual Civility Summit, and pretty big topic this year, building peace after or through or within conflict, as he pointed out. Conflict seems to be everywhere. I can think of few topics as important and relevant to all of our lived experiences. This week alone has been so challenging in so many communities in North America. So Amizade is the Portuguese word for friendship. We're an organization that was founded in the Brazilian Amazon 26 years ago. And we're lucky enough to be acting as the virtual host to take everybody on a very quick journey around the world to meet some of our friends who have particularly important stories to tell about building peace after conflict. So we're going to be talking about some very serious stuff here in the next month. We're also going to meet some very cool people. That starts next week. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously, John and Liam and Stephen are very cool people, very important folks who are going to be sharing their stories with us. We're going to be reflecting and interacting with these very cool people today. So it's not just about hearing stories, but we're also going to break out into some rooms and discuss a little bit about what we heard today. And then if things work out, we even might get the opportunity to kickstart some action together to try and address some of the issues that these very cool people are talking about. So what's the recipe today? And for the next 4 weeks, the approach that we're taking here is 1 part compelling story, all right, where there's going to be real human interaction and inspiration and an understanding of why these stories matter. Maybe a little bit of nerd stuff, especially here in next week, I would imagine, when we talk more about Holocaust history and what came after and how peace was built after the Holocaust. And then really importantly to us, action. So we're going to do that group activity. And we hope that you leave here today and each week with a few ideas on what you can do to help address some of the issues that we talk about. So who's Amizade? As we've said, we're a 26-year-old nonprofit based here in Pittsburgh. We work with over 100 education partners around the world and in over 20 different communities. We do 3 things. We bring diverse groups of people together into the same space. So today we're bringing folks from Northern Ireland, folks from ECU, and we're going to collide a little bit. We hope that in this room today, we get to inspire some empathy and maybe a little bit of civic engagement. And then hopefully this leads to us kickstarting some social action together. Usually we organize study abroad programs to do this. More recently, we've been doing it through virtual experiences that focus on things like climate change, anti-racism, ending extremism. That is very much going to be a theme here for these 4 sessions. And then, of course, community development. And finally, I think it's always important to note that we have United Nations consultative status. We work with government agencies, including the US State Department, and actually in Northern Ireland, the Education Authority. We do some corporate social responsibility work, and we have over 26,000 alums. So why am I talking right now? Why is this guy talking? Well, first of all, I'm the executive director of Amizade, but I'm also friends with a lot of the folks that we're going to be interacting with in the next month. And that's, I think that's important. I kind of woke up during the pandemic and realized how much conflict has influenced and impacted all of our lives. And it turns out that many of the spaces that we work in aren't that dissimilar in having battled some of these similar demons. And this is as important of a topic as it gets for me, because it's not just that extremism is impacting Belfast or that extremism impacted our capital on an isolated day on January 6th. But I might mention this next week. Extremism, radicalization has affected all of our families in vast ways. My grandfather was a Holocaust survivor. I lost nearly all of my relatives, my entire family tree, to the Holocaust. More recently, I was detained crossing the Mexican border into the United States. That was very troubling. And then a week later, of course, in my neighborhood, I had to run away from a gunman shooting up our local mosque, or I'm sorry, our local synagogue. Oh my gosh. So this is around us all over the place. And of course, this week alone, we've seen extremism happening here in the United States, in Atlanta, and then more recently in Boulder, Colorado. So who's this other guy? We have another person that's going to be helping assist in the next month. And Nick Grimes, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nick Grimes. I am the site liaison for Northern Ireland, Pine Ridge, Poland. So many of the sites that we'll be talking to over the course of the next few weeks. Also, I'm an 8-year Army veteran. I spent 2.5 years in Afghanistan of those 8 years, so I'm intimately familiar with conflict and violence. And more recently, I'm becoming extremely troubled with the amount of radicalization going on amongst the military and veterans. Is one great example of that is on Insurrection Day on the 6th. Over 20% of people who've faced criminal charges are military veterans. Not all of them combat vets, a lot of them peacetime vets, but veterans nonetheless. So this is something that's really important to me right now as well.
And Nick is going to be helping out also with a lot of the tech side of things. So very much grateful for your efforts this month. All right, and now for the main event. We're going to spend about 45 minutes hearing the life journeys from the following very cool people. Liam Stone, who I've been honored over the years to get to hear his stories in some communities in Belfast. He does some community tours that educate folks on some of his both personal histories, but also neighborhood histories. John Hoey, who I've had the great luxury of debating politics over the years and feeling both yucky and inspired for all sorts of different reasons. And then Stephen, who I can't underscore how important Stephen is. In fact, that day of the Tree of Life massacre, Stephen was one of the first people to reach out and to text me and to make sure that we were okay and that my family was okay. Stephen woke me up once a few years ago. I didn't even know that there had been a mass shooting in my brother's neighborhood. And he said, "Is everyone okay in Pittsburgh?" Hadn't even made the news here yet. So Stephen is not only an ally for building peace after conflict in his own community, but around the world, it's very important to him as well. And he's a very good friend. So then we're going to spend about 15 minutes in breakout rooms, reimagining and imagining our place and how we build peace in our communities. And finally, we're going to reconvene and open up for questions and final thoughts from our speakers. So everyone's a Zoom expert at this point, but I just want to remind you all, show your screen if you can. I think everyone loves to see faces. And if you can't, no worries. If you got to go to the bathroom, do that thing. We hope that you're going to be able to make it throughout the whole session today. And then we really hope that you'll be able to make it for all 4 sessions after this. Please, please, please feel free to use the chat box for any questions or comments or ideas that you have in real time, and we'll try to address them all. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my good friend and one of my heroes, Stephen Hughes. Stephen, take it away.
Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning to you. It's good afternoon here. And thanks very much for allowing us to be with you and to share our stories. I'm going to introduce you to 2 friends of mine. That they'll tell you their own background and their own stories, but they come from the two traditions here in the north of Ireland or the Northern Ireland, depending on your political persuasion and depending on your perception of what's happened in Ireland over many years. What we're trying to do today, hopefully through sharing our stories, to help identify for yourselves some of the issues that are personal to you, but also some community and societal and global issues that you may need to consider as part of your growth and development. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then I'll do a little presentation at the end before you break up into your breakout rooms. But the only thing that I would caution you to today is to open your mind. I've learned so much through peace building work, and what I have been led to believe were extremists from particular backgrounds aren't always what you see. And the word extremism and radicalization comes with a lot of perceptions and a lot of myths and assumptions. Hopefully what you'll learn from today is that how people can work together, how people from two traditions or two opposing political perceptions and sometimes violent backgrounds can actually come together to affect change in their communities. So I'll introduce you first to John Hoy, and John will give you a wee bit of background to himself.
I wasn't expecting to go first.
Well, it's the shirt, mate. It's the shirt.
I was hoping Liam was going to go first, because I was thinking about something there. Hello, everybody. I'm John Hoy. I live in Belfast. I've lived in Belfast all my life. I met Brandon, I suppose, quite a few years now, Brandon, I believe. And in spite of me being his political nemesis and antagonist, which I tend to do deliberately, just to wind him up, we do seem to get on quite well, and we do share a lot of the same values. It's fair to say that Stephen and I actually would be quite very, very close friends, as would Liam and I now. That wouldn't have always been the case. Again, I think that would be fair to say that. I grew up in the heart of East Belfast under the shadow of the two big yellow cranes, Samson and Goliath. It was very much a working class sort of Protestant background. We didn't have very much at all. It would be fair to say extremely deprived. And what that did was allow me to be sucked into a world where you could be accepted but easily manipulated into something else. Growing up, I was always taught that, I suppose, the aim of the Irish people was to drive the rest of us Protestants into the Irish Sea and get us off the island. My holidays would have been based in and around the 12th of July, which was a celebration of a war that happened 400 years ago. And basically grew up hating anything that was green or Irish, and that was a standard normalised thing to do. My parents were very, very disjointed. My family life was horrible growing up. So I attached myself to a lot of people who I felt were friends and who led me, quite willingly, I have to say, they didn't force me, who led me down a pathway of destruction for myself. In essence, looking back in reflection, it was probably a journey of self-harm rather than self-enlightenment. But it is what it is, and it happened to many hundreds of young people in my position right across the country. Culminated right across my teens and early 20s, where I would have been associated with extremist groups, or with groups who were intent on engaging in violent means for political gain. And I genuinely felt that was the right thing to do, because that's what I'd been brought up to believe. And it was only a period of sickness that helped me reflect what I was doing. I nearly died just before I was 30 years old. And it gave me a chance to reevaluate my own life, because I didn't want my children growing up without me. And it kind of gave me a chance to not only evaluate myself, but evaluate my morals, my values, and my whole thought process. And by re-educating myself, and I don't mean sitting in a university and doing degrees and stuff, I mean just literally learning about who I was and where I came from and why my beliefs were the way they were. It allowed me to see myself in a completely different light. Through working with the two governments, through the peace process in the early 2000s, I was thrust into partnership with Stephen. I have to be honest, I was quite reluctant at the time, only because he could eat more than me. It was just, we knew we were going to fight over the cafe stuff. No, Stephen and I were thrust into a program. We were both asked to engage in a peace building program, communities emerging from conflict, and we began a journey of trying to teach the young people to develop the tools that they would need in order to prevent them making the same mistakes as what we did. And from there, what we did was we created several quite modern youth programs based around community development, community and personal development actually for young people, and community relations programs for young people that we still do today. Now, I am trying to keep this brief because normally Stephen tells me to shut up and keep going, and then finish it up. And one of the things I want to point out, and I'll talk to people more, I suppose, when we're in the breakout rooms, is that leading up to this, and Stephen had asked me to sit in on this, and he said the theme was radicalisation. And I'd been thinking over the past 12 to 18 months, especially, and I'm going to go back to the point that Brandon made about us disagreeing politically. We have been engaging in quite sometimes heated debates, I suppose, Brandon, on social media. And I do have to throw my hands up and say I tend to do this on purpose just to get people's reactions. But it made me think about radicalisation and what that actually meant. And I did a wee bit of research just for my own benefit again. And I came up with two things. And it was two descriptions. To radicalise is to cause someone to adopt radical positions on political or social issues. And radicalisation is the process by which a person comes to support terrorism and extremist ideologies associated with terrorist groups. And what that actually means to me is when I was growing up, or when Liam was growing up, or Stephen was growing up, technically we were radicalised. And there may be disagreements about that because we cleverly in Northern Ireland disguise our radicalisation or our support for extremism by trying to justify it with culture, heritage, rights, and all the rest of it. But when you get to a point where society thinks it's okay for a young child in July to walk through Belfast wrapped in a Union flag singing "Fuck the Pope," pardon my French, but that's exactly what they're taught to do. Or a young child marching through the streets of Belfast at Easter and in some cases, and it's been seen in the media, with dark glasses and a beret on, taught to hate the Brits. You can see how that can manifest in the radicalisation. And what we have done as a society is we have normalised that. And there's a couple of really good examples that anybody can research. And again, I did this just leading up to this seminar. There are several cases, and especially on social media, where the murder of children has been put down to acceptable collateral damage, and sometimes justified because that they weren't the target, so it's okay, because we were fighting a war. And to me, that's complete BS. That shows me that as much when I was growing up, I thought this was a normal society. I thought everybody was taught the same way. In actual fact, we were being radicalised. We're being radicalised in our schools. We're being radicalised in our homes. We're being radicalised in our streets and by our media. And we became a society that normalised violence to a point where, and I'm sure Liam and Stephen can attribute to this, where you could be sitting in a house and hear a bomb go off and go, all right, okay. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a loud bang. You kind of check to make sure your own house is okay. And if it is, then go back to watching TV or having a cup of coffee. And that screams societal failure to me. It screams that we need to rethink about how we address the future. And I know Liam and Stephen and myself and Brandon and that have been involved in peace building for many, many years now. I think we're definitely getting to a point of we need to refocus our direction and how that actually works. And I go back to talking to the political debates that Brandon and I have been having. And I'll be totally honest, most of them were about Trump, because I know him and Stephen just love Donald Trump. The radicalisation came from that. And he's not. But the thing about the radicalisation is it's very, very easy to radicalise people depending on the void that's in their lives. So or maybe not even a void that's in their lives, but maybe even something that's happened in their lives. So from my perspective growing up, what we were taught growing up was we were being targeted by Republican terrorists. It's very easy for someone to tap into that. Subsequently, I suppose, in the same instance, when Liam was growing up, he felt, or his community felt, that they were being targeted by an invasive force, the British Army or the British establishment. And so it's very easy for people on the Republican side to be radicalised. But if we bring that into modern day times in terms of America, the reason why Trump won the first election was probably the same reason as why those people were easily radicalized, because they felt that they had enough of corruption. They were working class, and the established elite weren't speaking for them. They felt undervalued. They felt as if they were being downtrodden. And in actual fact, if you want to think about the radicalization in real terms, even in religious terms, you could quite easily draw a line, and I said this to Stephen during the week, you could quite easily draw a line right across the center of America. And the states to the south of that line, majority would be avid Trump supporters who would maybe wave the Confederate flag in one hand with a gun in the other hand, quoting the Bible, saying it was all about God. And it's that point where you step back and think, there's something wrong with this. Just because some people may disguise it as Christianity or Islam or republicanism or loyalism, it doesn't matter. It's all extremism and it's all radicalization. And we, as a societal group, need to be able to focus on how we can prevent our young people from being as easily manipulated and radicalized as what we were growing up. So,
brilliant, John. Thank you very much for that. And we'll go into this a wee bit more when we get the chance to talk. I'd like to introduce you now to Liam Stone, who's one of my colleagues as well. Liam, over to you.
Good, Stephen. Bit of a problem there, Stephen, is there, or what?
No, we can hear you grand, Liam. Yes, you're on two screens, but that's all. That's fine. We can still hear you.
Right. Well, falsa rib vagan dinne, smisha Liam, agus is Jaslam Buliliv. My name's Liam, and I have the privilege of meeting with you. As much to hear your story as what it is to hear my story. I've actually put my email address in the chat box there, that if I can be of any assistance to anybody after this here, feel free to get in touch. I'm a 64-year-old Irish Republican, and I've been a Republican for over 50 years, from the age of 13. And some people will say, how do you become politically motivated at the age of 13? And I suppose I'll have to give you some of my background. And I'm working on the assumption that you have a basic understanding of Irish politics. My father was a Protestant Unionist whose uncle had signed the Ulster Covenant of 1912, in which 500,000 Protestants vowed to fight to keep the union with Britain. My father was also a member of the British Army who was captured at Dunkirk and spent 5 years as a prisoner of war in Stalag XXA, just outside Gdansk in Poland. My mother was a Catholic Republican from Crossmaglen in South Armagh, whose uncles had fought with the IRA in 1919, 1920, 1921. But none of this was obvious to me whenever I was growing up in Ballymurphy in the 50s and the 60s. I just wanted to be the next Georgie Best, the Belfast boy. Whether it was good enough or not, I don't know. Believe it or believe it not, we never got our own television until 1968, just the week before Georgie Best won the European Cup final for Manchester United against Benfica. And the TV was like a big window into the outside world. Up until then, I thought everybody lived like us. But the TV was showing to me that there was different worlds going on, and there was different wars going on. I was seeing images of conflict in America going as far back as the 1960s. I was seeing images of peaceful demonstrators being battened outside the Democratic Party convention in Chicago in 1968. I was seeing peaceful demonstrators being shot and killed in Kent State University in America. And I'm trying to make sense of the world of what's going on. And this part of the world in which we live in exploded in August 1969. And for me, as a 12, 13-year-old, 14-year-old growing up, I was just trying to make sense of it all. And the light went on in my head on the 1st of April 1970. British soldiers, hundreds and hundreds of them, with machine guns and tanks and rifles and war dogs, invaded the area that I lived in, came into the area that I lived in, and I was standing beside my father, a man who had fought fascism, and he had says that what I was witnessing on the streets where I was living at the time was fascism. And a light went on in my head at the age of 13, 1st of April 1970, and I says, we have to fight this, we have to challenge this. So I became an active Republican at the age of 13. And I have been involved in all aspects of republicanism ever since. I was first shot at the age of 15 when the area that I lived in was attacked on the 13th of May, 1972. Ironically, or fortunately for me, some of the people who attacked the area in which I lived in on the 13th of May 1972, I later became involved in peace building and reconciliation work with them. I don't know whether they shot me or not, but I became involved in peace building, reconciliation work with them. One of them has since died. He was a loyalist leader. And before he died, he asked me to go over and meet him and sit down with him, which I did on a regular basis. But he knew that it was going to be the last meeting that me and him were going to have. And I gave him a hug and I wished him well, and he was dead within a couple of weeks. So that's to jump forward a wee bit. I was captured at the age of 19 on active service. I was sentenced to 56 years in prison, which I served 7 of them. Released at the age of 26. Returned to the Republican struggle. But the injuries that I suffered at the age of 15 caught up with me again at the age of 31, 32. So I became less of an active Republican, and I returned as a mature student to university, where I graduated with a master's degree in culture and colonialism, and I'm a firm believer in lifelong learning. I've been involved in peace building and community development, conflict transformation for probably about 30 years now. Some of it very public, some of it not so public. My experience is that the best peace building work takes place away from the glare of the media spotlight. That once a media spotlight goes on to any particular project, people adapt their respective positions and does damage to the project. As we're sitting here today in Belfast, there's probably 20 or 30, maybe more, what's called cross-community initiatives all taking place today. Quietly, slowly, but making progress nonetheless. The Belfast that I'm sitting in today is totally changed from the Belfast that exploded 50 years ago. The Ballymurphy that I'm sitting in today is totally changed from the Ballymurphy which politicized me at the age of 13, 50 years ago as well. So that's a kind of like a brief journey through my life story. I'm open to engagement with yourselves in terms of whatever points you want to be developed or whatever, you know. And the reason why I am stating that I'm a Republican is that in my work with young people and others, it's important that I don't try and pull the wool over their eyes or anything like that. I state quite openly what it is that I am. But I also state quite openly that the war, the conflict, the troubles is over. They are over and done with. They're gone and hopefully never coming back. And I work every day to try and ensure that they never come back. I work in different forms and fashions. I encourage young people not only into formal education, but informal education. Most of the young people who now go to third level universities in the north here are from the Catholic population. And I have difficulty talking about using Catholics and Protestants to signify what's happening here. I'm easier and better, more relaxed talking from a class perspective, that I like to talk about working class or middle class or upper class. But most people outside of Ireland and most people within it just recognise the religious tagging. So most young people who go to universities today in the north are Catholics. If you go into the High Court in Belfast to Chester Street, and I mean voluntarily go into it, not being brought into it by appealers facing charges or anything like that there. If you go into the High Court in Belfast today, you will find that most of the barristers practicing there are actually the sons and daughters of Republicans prisoners, or else there are, there's one, he would call himself infamous barrister, Joe Brawley, who is one of the best known barristers in Ireland. He is the son of a Republican prisoner. His father, Francis Brawley, was interned for a couple of years in the 1970s. So most of the legal profession, you would find sons and daughters of Republican prisoners. Business-wise as well, you will find that more and more Republicans are manifesting their politics other than through conflict. So to me, Ireland, Belfast, Ballymurphy has totally changed over this last 50 years. And I hope to be alive maybe another 20 years to see that change continue. But part of the approach is that, for me anyway, the conflict is over. No matter how difficult the problems are that we face, they will be faced by working together, not in conflict with one another, but by working together. So I wasn't too sure, Stephen, how long you wanted me to speak.
That's grand, Liam. Yep. Thank you very much for that.
Also,
so now it's exam time. So the first question on the exam is about context. For me, context is everything. And we're going to spend I'm going to ask one question, and if you can use the chat facility there, we're going to see who can win this little competition very quickly. If context is everything, name the film. So the film is a young girl is transported to a surreal landscape where she kills the first person she encounters. She then teams up with three total strangers to kill again. Name the film. Christy Rhodes. Congratulations. Yes, well done. It is The Wizard of Oz, because she drops the house on the first person. She then teams up with them three total strangers, the Tin Man and the Lion and the Straw Man, and goes off to kill another witch.
I'd have said Star Wars.
Context is everything, and to me, it's part of the conversation. Sorry, wrong screen. It's part of the conversation that we need to draw out in yourselves. The USA has a lot to learn from us here, but the context of what you are going through, although similar in theory in terms of power, oppression, and discrimination, extremism, radicalisation, all of these words, depends on the context of how you understand and perceive what the challenges are. My two friends and colleagues there have shared where they come from in this. I'm going to share where I come from as a youth worker. But I have to declare my bias in this process because I come from a particularly militant community. I come from a small community called Lardown. And for many years, John was seen as my enemy. I was brought up in a community that suffered quite significantly, including family members and friends who have been murdered and have suffered severely as a result of our conflict here. But the context is beyond my control. It was beyond what we could create. And in this conversation that we're having today, there's other protagonists in our conflict who aren't present. That being the governments. So we are only talking about part of the context here today. But what we're going to try and do is to link what we've learned in terms of radicalization and extremism as one person's perception. From my perception, it's exploitation, coercion, and the greed of the rich and powerful, and how they have exploited both of my friends from the communities that they come from, and how that they've been taken advantage of. Now, I was going to show you a little video. I'm only going to show you the first few seconds of it. Sorry. The community that I work in here in the Lower Falls. So this is the Lower Falls. This is where the conflict kicks off in 1968, when a radical preacher from one of our faith traditions leads a group of people up to remove a tricolour from a building, from that tower block. That the removal of that flag led to a riot that saw 1,300 people burned out of their houses. And one of our youngest victims of the conflict murdered, shot through the wall of the house. Many people will refer to this as the Battle of Bombay Street. It led to the burning of a number of houses. It led to the segregation of our two communities. So in Belfast, where I live, 90% of people live in 90% of their own faith or tradition, that being their political tradition. We call it the 90-90 rule. So 90% of Protestant Unionist Loyalists live in Protestant areas, and 90% of Catholic Nationalist Republicans live in Catholic communities. So that segregation that we have is the context to where we are. We have murdered each other, bombed each other. I mean, and we have treated each other in the most awful ways imaginable. And I know in the United States, yous have come through these as well. Yous have had the slaughter of the Native Americans. We're seeing, and still today, you're seeing the race-related issues. You know, you've had your lynchings for many years. You know, and we're still seeing people of difference being treated unequally or unequally, and being exploited and coerced into radicalisation and extremism, and no more so than recently with the Capitol building. But we do have to understand that the context to all this, in terms of the communities that we're talking about, they tend to be communities who are the most socio-economically challenged. And I'm sure you are seeing that in the United States. You know, John made reference to how Trump has exploited people in the Rust Belt and people who are socio-economically challenged to radicalize and develop his agenda. That's one perspective. My perspective and the perspective of youth workers is these are young people that are being exploited and being taken advantage of. The government's sort of approach to all of this. Sorry, excuse me 1 second. Sorry, guys, the staff will be here in a wee minute for you. I'm just in a wee meeting. Sorry, that's the worst about working on a youth club. We sort of get tortured. The government's approach to radicalisation, and here in the north, is a counter-terrorism strategy. And what it does, it takes what our challenges and our tensions here as something that needs to be put down, something that needs to be militarized, and something that needs to be chastised. That approach for us hasn't worked in the past and won't work again in the future. And that's something maybe that you want to discuss in your groups, this idea of tackling the exploitation and coercion of people from an economically challenged background is not going to work, and using a military strategy. The community that we work in is the most unhealthy community in the whole of the country. It's the fourth worst in terms of educational disadvantage. It's the third most impoverished community. It's the fifth to suffer crime. It has 30-year-old gangs, which is called the DHLA. We have 5 paramilitary extremist groups. Now, that wording is literally for use. I wouldn't use that wording here, because literally what we're dealing with now is gangsterism dressed as paramilitary or politically aligned groups. Now, that would be my perspective. We're also talking about a community that has struggled with interpersonal and political violence. We're right on the interface with our colleagues in the other tradition, and that interface often sees violence. So that's a major issue for us, a major challenge for our work. Our needs is that the communities are dependent on these paramilitary groups for policing, which is a problem. There's the impact of intergenerational trauma. And some of these things you're going to see, guys, when you look at the Rust Belt and you look at some of those communities that American society are now talking about being radicalized and extremism is growing, you'll see these issues in these communities. Do you know, deviant attitudes are leading to poor health, including self-prescription and soothing. And I know in America you have your opioid epidemic as well. Poverty and the black market that we have in these communities, and the lawlessness in some of the behaviours are again intergenerational issues. The lack of political or social leadership and the role of gatekeepers controlling communities. There's deviant attitudes to achievement and success, where thankfully we're beginning to win on that one. The legacy of the conflict and the romanticism and radicalisation by new groups who are trying to romanticize violence, not for any political gain, but for actual personal gain. And then there's the safeguarding of young people and the need to prevent them from coercion and exploitation. The government has a number of measures, right? That they, in their latest document, they talk about preventing apologists for terrorism and extremism. And they go on to say about Republican and loyalist gangs. They talk about giving guidance to local authorities, community and youth organisations and other institutions to better understand extremism. That doesn't happen. We get that conversation doesn't happen in our country. Funding is there for a specialist policing unit for what's called the Counter-Terrorism Internet Referral Unit, which is to tackle online radicalisation. And they also support community campaigns and activities to try and rebuke the extremist propaganda. So some of these government measures, as you can see, not one of them talks about education. Everything's taken from a militarism or a militaristic perspective. Nothing is about helping the young person become more aware when they're being exploited, when they're being taken advantage of, or do you allow them to be politically active without being violent or extremist? So in 2015, the government launched a new counter-terrorism strategy. This has failed miserably. And it's still, because we're seeing the number of gangs and the number of extremists growing. So this strategy has been an absolute and utter failure. And I know you've got the slides, so I'm not going to read these out to you. In 2015, the government said it must take a more sophisticated approach to identifying the factors which instigate radicalisation and in the measures it takes to tackle this. This has not came to the north of Ireland or Northern Ireland. This is completely and utterly focused on ISIS. And there's actually campaigns that are taking place in England to do that. We are not seeing what's happening here in Northern Ireland as terrorism. We are seeing it as gangsterism. And that's why the measures aren't being implemented here. There is a new reach that we have to make people aware of. The National Counter-Terrorism Security Office states that the internet has transformed the way terrorist organisations can influence and radicalise people. This is mainly focused on ISIS. Although I know in youth work, we've had some conversations as to how this implicates young people in violence. Barna Shield went on to say, she noted that the younger generation are more technologically literate than their parents and teachers and are particularly susceptible to online influences because they're almost constantly connected to the digital world. And this is where a lot of young people are getting their information. And there's no counter message. We've said this in youth services for many a year. There's no way, excuse me, because there's no online youth work, there's no way of helping young people identify, understand, and respond to this radical message that they're getting through the internet. So what we do, we bring people together. We educate people. We expose people to difference, whether it be faiths, political opinions, ethnicity, gender, anything. Sexuality, it doesn't really matter. What we do is, using Kolb's experiential learning model, is to expose people to difference and help them talk through. And it's a very, very simple conflict resolution model. Expose them, enable them to explore and learn from each other, and then give them the skills and talents to be able to deal with the learning that they need. The interdependency, the pluralism, the acceptability, you know, and the respect of people of difference, whether it be different opinions or different behaviours or different backgrounds or whatever it may be. And we have a number of partnerships, you know, and these are just local partnerships, although we continue to have our international partnerships with the United States. And these have been very, very successful in bringing American students to our young people. American students tend to be very pluralist. You know, we tend to get people who come from different backgrounds, who have different attitudes and different lived experiences, to share that learning with our children and young people. And that works an absolute treat. We have very, very simple objectives. You know, we just want to address the barriers to their education. You know, we want to change the narrative. We want to improve their social and life skills, critical thinking and self-awareness, improve their attitudes to the radicalisation messages, and improve social and economical and political systems and their participation in that. This onion model is a wee bit different because, as you can see, it goes from the individual to the peer group, to the family, and to wider society. And normally that would go the individual, the family, and the peer group. The peer group tend to have a hell of a lot more influence on teenagers than what the family do. So all that we do is with the individual and the peers first and second. We use what's called the circle of courage model. It's a strength-based model, focusing on the assets, the positive characteristics of a young person, not from a deviant or not from a deficit or a pathological perspective. Everything that we do is to build on the positive elements of it, of a person. We're trying to build a strength-based environment for the young people, and we're trying to create a strength-based community. And the book, for anybody that wants the theoretics, is Reclaiming Youth at Risk. Dr. Laurie Brantrow and Steve Brokenleg. Definitely well worth a read. In this whole process, we have a number of systems in place. We have a traffic light assessment system. We use personal action plans, what we call learning dreams, which belongs to Dr. Jerry Stein. We do a lot of mentoring and one-to-one support. Supporting the family has become a key part of our work. In particular, they tend to be single parents and they tend to be mothers. We connect with other professionals to develop as holistic a service as we can. Social services, youth justice agency, probation, schools, jail, PSNI, everybody and anyone who wants to make a positive contribution to helping our young people learn and grow. And then we have to understand that the process belongs to someone else. It belongs to the young person. So the pace of that journey is dictated by the young person. Anybody see the spelling mistake? No. Go on. So this is our model. Psycho spelled wrong, by the way. Adverse childhood experiences is one of our underpinning methodologies. And we have a two-pillar approach to tackling adverse childhood experiences. Psychological interventions, which are trauma counselling, addiction counselling. We have self-help groups, parent support groups, therapeutical interventions, mindfulness and resilience building. And then we have, where's our social? Oh yeah, sorry. So our social elements, we help young people grow through esteem and confidence building, through celebrating their achievements and helping them see the value and self-worth in themselves. We inspire them. We bring them to every event, every activity. We expose them to as much difference as we possibly can, and using reflective practice, help them critically analyze how vulnerable they are, what risks they're up against, what the consequences of their decisions are, and how to make better decisions. We comfort them. We use a lot of food. You don't get a body like this without a lot of food. But comforting them is very, very important. Making sure that they know they have a safe environment to grow and gain association and meet other people of difference. We listen to what they say. And Brandon, I'm sure you've seen this poster and heard that name, Court of Ideas, before. It was actually a title that we share with a friend of ours in the Hill District in Pittsburgh. And it's the way that we listen and hear our young people. And then finally, we collaborate with our young people. They own this process. They own this journey. All that we do is help them grow and to learn and to develop into much more decent, pluralist, interdependent human beings. All of this is about helping them understand, identify, and tackle people who are trying to exploit them, whether that exploitation is using them as drug dealers, using them as gang members, or exploiting them under the flag of a particular tradition. So I'll stop there, and Brandon, you're gonna break them up into some groups for conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much, Stephen. Thanks so much, Liam and John. So yeah, but also incredible time management, exactly on schedule, which is not how things normally work. So well done there. Before we go into, we're going to go into breakout rooms here in a minute and discuss some of what we heard, have a chance to kind of in smaller groups, think about how anything struck a chord in our own communities, in our own areas. But before we do that, I just want to ask one question. Then we're going to come back, by the way, and have plenty of time for Q&A so we can all interact together. But I have one question to head into the breakout rooms, and that is for all three of our guests here. If there were two concrete lessons learned both through your work as educators and youth workers and as your lived experience, having lived through generational trauma, personal trauma and throughout the Troubles, that you think people in this call should know, two concrete things that we can do or should be thinking about doing in our own communities from your lived experience and lessons learned? What would those look like? What would those two things be that we should be doing or thinking about? I don't know, Stephen, if I can start with you so I don't put John on the spot or Liam on the spot this time.
The two things that stand out for me, the first one is education. But not necessarily academics. I think academics and academic learning is absolutely essential. I think it's great. But we have to talk about personal and social development, the non-formal, the techniques, the ability to think logically, to make decisions, to assess risks, to know when you're being exploited, to know when you're being taken advantage of. I think that is really, really important. And the more we do that, the more impactful and effective the formal education system is. And the second bit for me is to tackle poverty. Poverty is not normal. Poverty is the exploitation of vulnerable people by the rich and the wealthy. There is no reason for poverty in any of our countries, none whatsoever. And it can be tackled very, very easily for very, very small amounts of money. But to me, the macro rationale behind why communities are kept poor needs to be tackled. That's just my opinion in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And yeah, just to echo what you said, I think both of those are going to show up as themes throughout the next 3 sessions as well. Certainly in getting in accurate information, being informed. We're going to see that in Berlin. We're going to see that in Pine Ridge, and we're definitely going to see that when we talk to the folks.
I think one of the things we've learned in our experiences is that we have what's called them syndrome, Brandon. So it's when you point your finger at someone and go, it's them, it's the blacks, it's the Jews. No, there's always 3 fingers pointing back when you're pointing at someone else. And first and foremost, you've got to look at yourself and your contribution to radicalization, exploitation, extremism. That's a big problem. And I know that you've got this in the United States. It's the blacks, it's the Chinese at the minute, or the Asians. It's very, very easy to point fingers at people. But first and foremost, you have to look at what your contribution is to this, whether you tackle it and you resent it and you fight back against it, or you allow it by doing nothing. All you get from sitting on the fence is splinters in your ass. So yeah, get off
a broken fence.
Liam, 2 concrete takeaways here that you'd like people to think about in building peace during, before, after conflict.
To me, democracy is not just, or should not just be voting once every 4 years in a presidential election. I would like to see more people taking part in participative democracy. Democracy is about the residents group. It's about a parent support group. It's about a cultural group. It's whatever you want it to be. Irish speakers have a saying, "Na habere, Johnny, don't talk about it, do it." I mean, wherever you live, you have no need to seek permission from anybody to set up a residents group or an environmental awareness group or whatever. So I would like to see more participative democracy. I would like to see it in a context of, whenever you're fighting a war, you see things black and white. I have the great fucking luxury of seeing the world now in multicolour, like a rainbow, and I'm really, really enjoying it. And the last thing I'll leave you with is something that hugely impressed by the American woman, Maya Angelou, and the work that she has done. And what she says is, you can't go through life wearing catcher's mitts in both hands. You have to give something back every now and again. So that's what I would say more of.
You're here. Thank you, Liam. John?
It's difficult. It's difficult to pick 2, to be quite fair and honest. I 100% agree with both everything that both Liam and Stephen have said. To sort of paraphrase a wee bit, active citizenship, of course, is massive and forms the basis of any futuristic pluralist society. But something that Stephen said about education, and one of the things for me has to be realizing what your levels of acceptability are and who determines what they are. Because we're forever hearing the phrase, one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist, and one person's patriot is another person's extremist, you know. So who sets those levels? Who determines what is acceptable? So that's the first thing. Second thing, and I'm being very cryptic about that because I want the people on the screen to think about it. And the second thing for me is, the one thing we keep missing is lessons learned. Every generation that comes before us, including our own, has made an absolute monumental balls up. Every one of us. And nobody can say our such and such generation did it right. They didn't. They just made a different type of balls up. We don't seem to have any lessons learned. And the reason why I'm saying that is, Liam said something earlier about the war is 100% over. I'm not entirely sure I agree with that. And we have seen, because of arguments over something as serious, I suppose, as Brexit, threats and counter threats of bombings and killings again. It only takes one or two complete head case extremists to spark it all off, because we're in tenterhooks and we haven't completed that conflict transformation cycle yet. So lessons learned is important. It's massive. And we still see the radicalisation of young people. We still see the justification of murder and mayhem from both sides on social media all the time on a daily basis. We haven't learned a thing yet. We are managing conflict. We haven't learned anything from it. If I could throw in a third one, the third thing I'd do is ban social media. I think it's a curse. I think it's an absolute curse. Somebody said, and I'll leave you with this, somebody said it's not about the truth anymore, it's about who gets the story out first.
John, thanks so much. Appreciate that input. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we are going to spend about 10 minutes in small groups of 4 to 5, and we're going to just have a little quick conversation. I'm going to put up some prompts here. You can feel free to use these prompts to sort of guide the conversation. And then we're going to come back and then have a quick open 10-15 minute discussion and a Q&A with our panelists here. And then we'll set the stage for next week. But some things to think about. What stood out to you as particularly compelling about the stories you heard? What questions are you left grappling with? There were multiple times, hearing from John and Liam that I thought, oh, wow, yeah, okay, aha, that was something that's very relevant to something going on here in Pittsburgh, or something that we just saw in the news the other day. Where do you see forms of extremism and radicalization in your own community? In East, whether it's in the university community, whether it's in the state, or whether in the region? And what lessons or takeaways did you learn from the presenters that can be applied to extremism in your own community? And I'll just share, it was probably 10 years ago, Stephen first introduced me to the idea of creating an anti-radicalization network in Pittsburgh. He had started coming to Pittsburgh. He started bringing young people from different communities in the country to the city. And I said, basically, what radicalization problem are you talking about? What extremism problem are you talking about? And then pretty much after every event that happened here or happened nationally, I said, he's right. How do we do this? How do we stop this? How do we stop the next one? So, okay, Dennis, if you're able to break people out now, and then we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes.
Dennis, would you like us to go into join the rooms?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Jump right in. Hi, Grace.
If Stephen's talking in the other group, you'll get him back about 6 o'clock. Dennis, just while we're waiting on everybody, are any plans for you guys to come back over again once the pandemic's over?
Well, yeah, so we're just talking about that. We are putting in a proposal to come back next May 22.
Brilliant. It'd be great to see you.
Yeah. So we had something in the works in partnership with Stranmillis University to do a course and a service learning experience, but then that got canceled, obviously. So, yeah, fingers crossed that we can pull that off.
Yeah, it'd definitely be good to see us back over again.
Love to see you in person.
You can see how we've all aged well.
Yeah, that Grecian 2000's working a treat, John.
It's the light and pure grey. I've got big white stripes in my beard. I don't know whether that's my 2-year-old daughter or just doing this work all the time.
It shows your wisdom.
We have everyone back now, right? Yeah. Welcome back, everyone. Hope your conversation was fruitful. So we've got 8 minutes here, and we wanted to open it up and give you opportunity to ask questions or share anything from your breakout room that you found compelling. I'll start real quick and just say that in our breakout room, we had 2 education majors, and both of them, it sounded like in a lot of ways their life path is being vindicated by some of what you're saying, that education is key, that there's a unique responsibility, not necessarily with us, but with the folks who are coming after us. And if nothing else, I think that carrying on that responsibility in all of us, as I think all 3 presenters mentioned, is super important. Like, we can't just sit back and expect things to become more peaceful. It takes effort, it takes work. But yeah, let's open it up. Questions, comments, or anything that was in your breakout room that's on your mind.
We talked a little bit about wanting to know kind of like what your space looks like as far as the youth programming, like where are you located, kind of within all the action that's going on, and then what does your physical space look like?
I'm happy enough to share. We're in a very small community. It's one of the most impoverished communities in the country. We are right on the interface, a wall that segregates our 2 communities. So it's almost like the Berlin Wall type thing. It's about 4 miles long, goes from the city centre to the mountain, and it keeps one tradition, the pro-United Ireland tradition, separate from the pro-British tradition. And that wall alone, just living within 30 meters of that wall, impacts your health, your education, your employability, it affects mental health, all elements of your life. But the people on the other side of the wall, the people that we point to and blame everything on, are exactly the same and face the exact same challenges as what we do. And I think that radical message and that extremist message is that don't trust them, they're coming to get you. And that's what our politicians do. They breed that fear and hate of them, and that's what undermines everything that we do and try to do.
I have a question for John and Liam, if you guys don't mind. So in our breakout, we talked about how nearly impossible it seems to have someone on the far left and on the far right in the US sit down and actually have a conversation, much less do any work moving forward. So as young men, like, you guys were very much polar opposites on the opposite sides of the issue. Like, what softened you, or what was like the motivating factor to have you decide, like, okay, this is bigger than the issues at the time? Like, what led you to sit down and talk about the future?
Our love for the same food, I think. For me, if you don't mind me going first, for me, it was a realization that what I was doing or what I was involved in was wrong. I'm sorry. For me, it doesn't matter what. It doesn't matter if you think you have a just cause. Causing death, destruction on anybody isn't right. There has to be a better way. There has to be. And if there isn't, then we're all doomed. I had got tired of making the same mistake and watching others make the same mistakes and watching the people above me make mistakes, and decided that I wanted to do something different. And what I wanted to do different was try and help young people avoid making the same mistakes as what I did. And that's what it was for me. It was a complete and utter realization. So yeah, at the time, anything I was involved in I felt was justified. Anything that I did, I felt was reasonable because I believed it was right. But it was the realization that the second you cause harm to someone, the second you've lost the argument. And there has to be a better way. We can't live together if we can't work out how to live together. If we're going to continue to target, hurt, maim, murder, destroy, both physically and mentally, then we're never going to be able to survive together. And you need to work out how that it's okay to respect each other's opposing viewpoints. It doesn't matter. I mean, Stephen and I, strangely, although we're best friends now, still have rival soccer teams. Stephen's an Arsenal fan, and he's got Brandon joining him, by the way. Just saying.
No. I'm going to interrupt here. But there's a difference between quality.
Stephen took me to a soccer match where the fans sang about killing the team that I supported. So anyway, it was about, for me, it was about trying to make sure that our future generations had a better alternative than what we did. And that was it.
Yeah, I agree with that there. But I have to preface my comments by saying that I'm not a pacifist. I hope that I didn't project that I'm a pacifist and that I would not use violence under any circumstances. I would certainly, if you look over your shoulder, I would definitely confront Hitler. You know, there's no way that I would just say, well, I'm not going to fight him. Right? So what made me push for a different way? Well, two things. One was a personal one and one was a political one. The late 1980s, the world was changing. It had totally changed from what it was in the late 1960s. Very quickly, Mandela was negotiating with the white South Africans. Arafat was negotiating with the Israelis. The Sandinistas had fought the war but lost the peace. El Salvador was negotiated till an end. The eastern black countries collapsed. So we're existing in a totally different environment. So politically, I was looking at things and saying, look, this isn't working. This isn't bringing about change. Part the morality of it for a minute. As I say, I'm not a pacifist. The world was changing, and all them things led, I think, to a critical mass of people arriving at the same destination saying, you know, this isn't working. On a personal level, I have to say that me becoming a parent made me reevaluate everything. I, unlike other Irishmen, I only became a parent at the age of 31, 32. And that made me look at things and go, what's happening here? You know? And personally, my belief system started to change whenever I became a parent. And internationally, things were changing politically.
Liam, John, Stephen, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for your work in bringing peace to your communities and peace to communities all over the world. And I'm always inspired every time I'm in Belfast by what you're doing in the youth clubs, and by, of course, that you see global solidarity as being part of our quest towards more joy and justice. So thank you so much. We're out of time right now. Before I say farewell and pass it over back to Dennis to say final farewells, I just want to remind everyone, same time next week, we'll be traveling from Belfast over to Berlin, and we're going to be meeting with an incredible dude. His name is Dr. Matthias Haas, and we're going to be reflecting on sort of after the Holocaust, how we built peace in Europe. And he